Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. And this time I'm talking about episode 1 of the TV series Arrow. This is the new live action take on the character of Green Arrow from DC Comics. I've been looking forward to this show for quite a long time. All the stuff that I read about it when the show was in production, it really did give me hope. I really had a good sense that this show was going to work out, that this was going to be something that I would like. And now, having just finished watching the first episode, I gotta say, it's really nice to have turned out to be right. There are going to be people out there who are going to be really upset by this take on Oliver Queen, and okay, fair enough, everybody's entitled to their opinion. But I really like what we're looking at here, and let's get right into it. So I got my notes right here. So if you see me looking off to the side or quite a bit, that's what I'm doing, is checking my notes. So anyway, let's get into the main thing. The main thing that I want to talk about here. And I've seen a lot of people basically complaining that basically it's different than the comics. Well, okay, first of all, yes. We're dealing with a live action television series, not a comic book here. Of course it's going to be different. A lot of people have been complaining, well, he's not called Green Arrow. Well, yeah, okay. As near as we can tell, Oliver doesn't really call himself anything in this episode. And while he does wear green, it really would be very strange if for some reason he started calling himself, and then that day on the island I decided to start calling myself Green Arrow. I mean we got enough cheesy comic bookish dialogue in this show already. And while this is a show that's obviously taking some very serious cues from the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, it's still its own beast. And while Green Arrow has been around since like the 40s, so he has a history almost as long as Batman, he does simply not have Batman's popularity. If you're going to do a Batman movie, Batman has to refer to himself as Batman. Green Arrow simply has leeway there. So honestly, I can't blame them for going that way. They're trying to sell Green Arrow again, basically as basically the sort of Batman, Christopher Nolan Batman, the TV series. Okay, let's not mince words here. That's what they're going for with this take on Green Arrow. And if they're going to do that, then okay, let's run with it. Let's run with keeping this as, quote unquote, realistic as possible, because realistic is in fact a very, very relative term. So yeah, the idea that he wouldn't call himself Green Arrow, that he wouldn't maybe even call himself anything, we don't know for sure yet, okay, that's perfectly reasonable. And at the end of the day, you and I, we all know this character is meant to be Green Arrow. And the fact that he isn't called that right now doesn't mean that he won't call himself Green Arrow at some point in the future. I like to think of this as being like on Smallville, where while Clark was running around doing superhero stuff for a while, and he was even known as the Blur. Now granted, he didn't really let people get a good look at him, and he wore, honestly, for quite a while, a spectacularly stupid costume. But it was only at a later point in his career as a superhero that he officially really stepped in front of the camera and became Superman as we know him. So I can certainly see that if the show has a nice healthy run, the final episode being Oliver Queen stepping out in the traditional, or something very akin to it, Green Arrow outfit, explicitly referring to himself as Green Arrow. And frankly, I think that would be an excellent culmination of whatever his character's journey is going to be on this TV show. I certainly felt that while Smallville did have its ups and downs, and probably shouldn't have lasted 10 years, but anyway, that it was ultimately that incredibly satisfying moment at the end, at the final episode of the TV series, where we got to see Clark unquestionably being Superman. That really made all the bull, and believe you me, Smallville delivered plenty of bull, that made it all worth it. So another thing that people have been complaining about is, well, Green Arrow shouldn't kill guys. He's a superhero, and DC heroes don't really kill people. Well, okay, first of all, DC superheroes can and do kill people, especially in more modern times. I mean, if you've not been paying attention to what's been going on in the Green Lantern comics, yeah, the Green Lanterns have killed quite a few guys. In fact, it was even explicitly stated Green Lantern rings can now be used as lethal weapons during the Sinestro Corps War. Or, I'm sorry, yeah, during the Sinestro Corps Wars that happened. Also, we've certainly had more than a few superheroes who have taken lives. Hawkman, I'm pretty sure, has killed more than a few people over his career. Manhunter, especially the Kate Spencer incarnation. Kate Spencer, someone we'll be seeing on the show, apparently. And if I'm not mistaken, in the Green Arrow comics, not too awful long before 0 Hour, Green Arrow himself did cross the line and killed some people. So, yeah. And let's also keep in mind that one of the reasons the DC heroes observe that no killing thing is that they essentially have the other superheroes, particularly guys like who are very firm believers in that, like Batman and Superman, who are essentially there to be the role models and keep everybody else in check. As near as we can tell, this is a world in which there are no superheroes. Or at the very least, this is a world in which superhumans, they may not even exist. We haven't seen anybody who actually has superhuman powers yet. It may be a version of the DC universe that only has the extremely talented martial artists / combating folks like Ollie, and some of the other characters that, from what I've been reading about, will be turning up later on in the series. I'm going to try not to spoil really anything that I've read about this series, and I haven't read spoilers, just general information about the series. But anyway, so with that also said, let me continue on by saying there have literally, since Green Arrow was first created, been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Green Arrow stories where Green Arrow does not kill anyone. So what's wrong with having one version of the character who does not have that compunction? And let's keep in mind, when Ollie takes down Hunt's bodyguards, Hunt explicitly says he put them in the hospital. Now, granted, it is made very clear to us that Ollie is not afraid to kill people. He breaks that one thug's neck, and he certainly killed some people when he broke into Hunt's office, like the fellow he held in front of himself to absorb the bullets from an assault rifle, which apparently can't actually go through anything thicker than one human being. Yeah, I'm pretty sure assault weapons can shoot through two people if they're standing right in front of each other. But hey, it's TV, right? So anyway, Ollie is willing to kill people, but he's not the Punisher. He will not kill people just for the sake of killing them. He will kill people because he needs to. He won't kill like every single thug that a bad guy happens to have working for him. And I like that. I don't particularly like using this word. That's a practical approach to killing for a superhero. He's like a soldier in a way. Soldiers don't go out of their way to just kill people just because. They kill people because they have a mission, and that is a necessity for the mission. Okay, so I don't think we want to really get too much heavier in that. I guess some people out there are upset that he's not wearing the mask and he's got the face paint thing going on instead. Well, I don't think I really need to say too much about the fact that it is quite a bit more practical simply to put on some face paint rather than to try and spirit gum an actual mask to your face, because even then a mask can potentially be knocked off and get in your way of your vision and all this other fun stuff. And of course there's always somebody who has to go out and complain the fact that he doesn't really have the classic Green Arrow goatee. Well, first of all, when he first appeared, Green Arrow didn't even have facial hair back in the 40s. That came later. Secondly, Green Arrow's choice in facial hair, that's also sort of varied a good bit over the years. Now, granted, the classic sort of really ridiculous looking goatee, he doesn't have it because it would look ridiculous on a person in the real world. Okay? If we want to have a successful TV series, we can't have the viewers wanting to laugh every time they see Ollie's face. So again, these are all very pragmatic changes, and I don't really have a problem with that. Now, I guess I should say that I'm not the hugest Green Arrow fan in the world. I like Green Arrow. I've read a decent number of Green Arrow comics, but I can't really quote a chapter and verse on the characters. And even for this review, I had to hit Wikipedia and the DC Comics wiki a few times to brush up on a few things. But I'm going to try and give you the best review that I can, so let's continue on. One thing that I did notice during the course of this episode, and is a good bit of the old parkour going on, I think, folks, we're just going to have to resign ourselves to stuff like that just being inevitable in sort of modern superhero-y stories right now. We certainly have seen it more than a few times. It's just going to be like, eventually, I think it's just going to be like karate or martial arts or kung fu or things like that. Just sort of stuff you see in these movies that it's sort of a given that the characters can do. And be perfectly fair, to survive on that desert island, it does make sense that Ollie would gain the skills of moving around a pretty complicated environment quickly and with speed. So again, it does make sense. But I won't lie, I think parkour has become a little bit of a cliche in more recent times. Speaking of parkour, if you want a cool parkour movie, go watch Barrio 13. It's a pretty good French movie. Anyway, so one nod that we get to the comics very, very early on is, of course, the look that Ollie has when he's on the island. That's very, very blatantly lifted from the Green Arrow Year 1 comics. Also, on the island, we get to see none other, briefly stuck up on a pole with an arrow through the eye, is the mask of Deathstroke. Deathstroke the Terminator. Legendary DC Comics bad guy. Very, very badass dude. On Smallville, his version there, Slade Wilson, killed Hawkman. And if you're familiar with the Teen Titans cartoon from several years ago, then you are most certainly familiar with the character of Slade. Of course, Slade Wilson is Deathstroke's true name. And, he and Green Arrow have butted heads over the years a few times. And he's certainly a very logical choice if he's ultimately going to be, say, for example, Green Arrow's arch enemy. Man, he really is an excellent choice for that role. And just the fact that Deathstroke has such serious connections to the greater DC universe, particularly the Teen Titans, really gets me hopeful that we'll see some of the more superpowered characters at some point during the series. Maybe. But anyway, continuing on from what we see at the very beginning, and throughout the episode, we get to see Ollie's voiceover and narration, and it's very in keeping with the sort of stuff that we see in the comics. Now, granted, it's also more than a little cheesy, but as a comic book fan, I've grown to appreciate the occasionally cheesy side of superheroes a great deal. And it's just basically what sounds good on a written page in a comic book tends not to sound quite as good coming out of the mouth of a person in live action. Now, listening to that dialogue, I could totally see that sort of dialogue being in the panels, in the narration of a comic book, and it would really fit. It would seem in keeping with the sort of story we're seeing here. But again, as I said, hearing it come out of the voice of an actual actor and in a story involving real people, it just seems, well, as I said, kind of cheesy. But you know what? I can live with that because, as I said, a certain amount of cheese is to simply be expected in a superhero story. Now, granted, you can either embrace it and run with it, sort of the way some stuff like, say, the 60s Batman show did, or you could try and keep it to a minimum, the way Christopher Nolan did. But again, there's just a certain amount of cheese that's is basically inescapable in a story like this. So let's move on and talk about some of the other characters. I'll talk more about Oliver later. Let's briefly talk about Laurel, Diana Laurel Lance. So that is her full name here. For people who aren't familiar with the comics, I'm not going to get into a big thing about Laurel Lance versus Diana Lance and the whole history of Black Canary. Just as safe to say that, yeah, Diana Lance, she is most commonly these days in the comics referred to by her first name, is Black Canary. She's essentially Green Arrow's, in the comics, traditionally Green Arrow's superheroic partner slash girlfriend slash lover slash, at least for a while, wife. Now, of course, this version of her does not seem to have any powers. She doesn't have her martial arts training. She certainly doesn't have the trademark canary cry or even the cool motorcycle that Black Canary likes to tool around. She doesn't even seem to have that fetish for fishnet stockings for which Black Canary is so famous. But again, we're seeing this character at her origin point, really. At the very beginnings of when she could possibly be taking the journey to becoming the character of Black Canary. So I don't have a problem with that. And I do want to point out, it's sort of implied that the folks that she worked for, these legal aid folks, are really struggling for money, yet they seem to have one of the nicest, most spacious offices I have ever seen. I mean, wow, those guys must really, really have a great rent control deal or something going on, because a struggling legal aid group should not have an office like that. Now, let's talk about Ollie's sister, Thea. He does, in fact, refer to her by her. He does refer to her using the nickname Speedy. If you're familiar with the Green Arrow comics, of course, Speedy is traditionally the name of Green Arrow's sidekick. For a long time, that was Roy Harper. But for a while, that he was replaced by the character of Mia Durden, who took up the mantle and became the second Speedy. Mia Thea. So, are we going to possibly get to see Thea kind of taking on the role that Mia played for a while in the comics? Well, possibly. She is going down a somewhat dark and dangerous road, and well, not to put too fine a point on it, but in the comics, Mia was also an HIV-positive former prostitute. No, seriously. Oh yeah, and she was indeed a teenager. So, yeah. I don't really have anything to add on that one. I think that particular fact really just sort of speaks for itself. Let's see. One thing I do want to give a nod out, what I want to talk about, is some of the nods to the comic book creators here. Of course, Hunter briefly refers to a judge named Grell that he has in his pocket. If you're a fan of the Green Arrow comics, you of course know Mike Grell. He was the writer and artist on Green Arrow for something like 6 years. He was the writer and artist on The Longbow Hunters, an extraordinarily influential Green Arrow miniseries. He's also the creator of the character of Travis Morgan, the Warlord. So again, a very venerable DC creator, and I do like the fact that they give a really nice shout out to him. I also noticed that, of course, the bodyguard guy is Diggle. I can't help but think this is probably a reference to Andy Dingle, or however the devil you say that guy's name, who's probably best known to folks as the guy who really defined The Losers. You remember that movie from a few years back? That movie would not have been possible if it weren't for Andy Dingle coming up with his take on The Losers. So definitely get to see our references, or the shout out to the creators was really nice. So let's see. Geez, I can't read my own handwriting sometimes. Isn't that embarrassing? Yeah, okay. So, moving on, let's talk about some of the other characters since we're on that line that are apparently popping up from the comics. Tommy Merlin. Um Merlin's not really a character I'm super familiar with. I've only seen him pop up a few times, but he's a guy they like to trot out whenever there's a huge collection of bad guys. He's always hanging out with the Injustice League or the Killer Elite or the League of Assassins. And Merlin's thing, he hasn't even, to the best of my knowledge, even been given a first name in the comics. I'm betting, though, we're going to find out that it's Thomas at some point in the not too distant future. But anyway, he's basically evil Green Arrow. He's an evil archer guy who dresses all in black and hangs out with other supervillains. Here, he's of course a very different character, and you know what? I don't have a problem with that. I really have no emotional connection to the character from the comics, and I don't think that they're just going to slap this name on this guy unless Tommy is going to go in a very significant direction. And well, I guess you could sort of make the mistake. Well, how could he possibly end up being, an evil black archer guy to rival Oliver, if, to the best of our knowledge, he's never picked up a bow in his life? Well, again, this is only the first episode, so really, what do we have to work with in terms of his character, other than the fact that he's kind of a hedonist, a bit of a dick, and has something going on with Laurel at some point? We just simply don't have enough information to work with, so I think it's unfair to kind of condemn the character right off the bat. And again, who knows where this character is going to go in the future? It is entirely possible that he could become the sort of evil Green Arrow at some point down the line. So, let's give the guy the benefit of the doubt, all right? Another character that we're dealing with is Draken. Now, to the best of my knowledge, he's really not a terribly well-known character, but I do remember him turning up in some of the Green Arrow comics that I read several years back. In the comics, he's Greek. Here, it's not really explicitly said exactly where he's from, but he is quite clearly a foreign guy. In the comics, if I remember correctly, he was also a dwarf. And no, I don't mean like the, Gimli kind of dwarf. He was like an actual little person. But he was still considered, essentially, after what was it? Deathstroke is considered the first greatest assassin, and Drak in the DC universe, and maybe Lady Shiva number 2, and like Draken is like number 3. Or maybe I'm getting it a little out of there. But anyway, he's basically considered one of the top assassins in the DC universe. Actually, it's kind of hard to keep track of all the top-rated assassins in the DC universe. Deathstroke and Deadshot and Lady Shiva and poor Tommy Monaghan's dead, so I guess we can leave Hitman out of there. But anyway, he's this fairly serious contender for bad guy assassin types in the DC universe. Now here, Ollie is able to take him down. They have a good tussle, but he isn't presented as a huge challenge. But again, we've only seen him very briefly in one episode, so I really don't think we have enough to work with on the character. But I'm hoping he does develop into a significant threat. So anyway, let's see here. Boy, I really need to work on my own handwriting. Yep, I cannot read what that particular little bit means. Wow, I feel dumb right now. But anyway, let's move on and talk about one of the other things that I noticed about this show. First of all, let's talk about the Arrow's base. And please forgive me if I continually refer to him as I switch between referring to him as Arrow and Green Arrow. To me, there isn't really a huge difference. We all know this is Green Arrow, so why get hooked? Why get hooked on the semantics? So anyway, Ollie's little superhero-y bat cave is apparently going to be an abandoned warehouse. An abandoned warehouse in the bad part of town that somehow junkies and homeless people never managed to break into, despite the obvious lack of a security guard of any sort. Okay, hope you got some really sturdy locks on that place, Ollie, because otherwise you're going to have some guy stumble in. Eventually, some guy stumble in there, reeking of you know hair of the dog and pee, going in there and trying to find a bed in your little green arrow cave. Yeah, arrow cave. He actually had one of those. That's right. That's even what it was called. Was the arrow cave. Holy smokes! They were not even trying to be subtle back in the old days, were they? But anyway, uh that says Draken. Well, okay, I already talked about that. Oh man. My third grade teacher was right. My handwriting really is terrible. But anyway, let's go back to Tommy for a second. I was interested in his little conversation at the end with Quentin Lance, where Quentin says to him, if he asks him if he's roofied anybody lately. Now I can't help but wonder, was Quentin just being a jerk there? And I'll have some more to say about Quentin in a minute. Or was he hinting at something more serious? Is this an indication, maybe, of what we might be seeing from Tommy in the future? I mean, the idea that the idea that he's a rapist. I mean, that's certainly an disturbing take. It's certainly very different from anything we've ever seen of his character in the comics, to the best of my knowledge. Last I checked, the villain who went around raping people was Dr. Light. I'm just gonna leave it at that because, yeah, I don't want to go down that road. That's one of those things that no good tends to come of discussions of that sort of thing in relation to fandom. So let's leave it at that. But one other thing that I want to say about Tommy before we move on is I like that he's no fool. He very quickly picks up on just how fishy it is that Green Arrow happens to pop up at the building right across the street from where Ollie is hanging out. And, it's really funny. Ollie was the only one who ever saw this guy. So I like that Tommy's not just this stupid party boy. He's someone that we need to keep an eye on because he's no fool. He is one of the people who is closest to Oliver. And if there's anybody who has the greatest chance at this point of figuring out Ollie is Green Arrow, well, to me it looks like it might be Tommy. And if he is destined to go down the bad guy path, well, that presents a really serious problem for Ollie. Now let's move on and talk about the character of Quentin Lance. Now, one thing I do like about this episode, and this is just really the result of me forgetting about stuff I read in regards to the casting, is that he's Laurel's father, as well as the father of whatever Laurel's sister was called. She dies in the first couple of minutes of the show. I really did not feel even the slightest bit motivated to write her name down. So anyway, he's presented as a rather interesting character. Because I forgot who he was, really, it made him seem like he was someone who was just unnecessarily being a jerk when he was interrogating Ollie. So the whole thing of him basically getting that reveal that he's Laurel's father and that he, of course, also blames Ollie for his daughter's death, that was a fairly nice and dramatic twist. Of course, there's also the question of, should a police officer be allowed to investigate a crime related to someone that he knows personally? I mean, he's not a cop or a judge, so there's no prosecution involved here, but still, it seems really sort of fishy, especially when the person this isn't just like some guy he knows from around town. This is the guy he blames for the death of his daughter. I mean, I don't know the particular legalities of this sort of thing in relation to police officers. I know, if this was a prosecutor or a defense attorney or a judge, they'd have to recuse themselves. But still, this seems like a really very iffy kind of thing. Also, they're there to talk about a kidnapping. Last time I checked, kidnapping is a federal offense. and thus falls under the directive of the FBI. So, as I understand US law, it should actually be federal agents who are questioning Oliver about his kidnapping. His kidnapping in relation to a murder, by the way, let's not forget that, rather than the local cops. But, hey, it's really not terribly dramatic if some nameless Fed is the one doing the interrogation, right? This is just one of those things that we sort of have to allow for good dramatic storytelling. I guess maybe you could call it Hollywood law if you want, or if, like me, you spend a disturbing amount of time on TV tropes. But, this is something I'm willing to forgive. Actually, before I move on, I do want to talk about one other thing. I'd almost forgotten about it, that fans have been complaining about this show, is that Green Arrow's hometown is changed from Star City to Starling City. Okay, honestly, this seems like a really petty change to me. I mean, a really petty thing to get upset about. First of all, let's not pretend that the cities' names in the DC universe are, for the most part, horribly, horribly original. I mean, Metropolis, that's a word for a big city. Gotham City. Well, Gotham is in fact just another seriously old-timey word for a large city. Midway City. Not a city that gets a whole lot of play these days, but it exists in the DC universe. Hub City. I mean, and I can go on and on. But seriously, Star City sort of falls under that definition of, did you spend more or less than 5 minutes thinking up the name of the city your superhero is going to hang out in? So, now granted, Starling City also sounds more than a little ridiculous. But it's something I can more see a place being named Starling City than I could Star City. Star City just sounds like something that a marketing company would come up with, rather than something that people would actually lay a name on naturally. And honestly, at the end of the day, does this really matter? And, if this is really something that's going to turn you off to the show to such a big degree, then you know what? You might as well walk out the door right now. Because this is really such a minor detail. I can't really understand anyone getting super upset over something this small and petty. But anyway, let's wrap this up by talking about the twist at the end with Oliver's mom. So, I'd heard that she was going to be a very surprising character, someone we really would need to keep an eye on. And this certainly does prove it. I mean, she hires some guys to kidnap her son, who were not above torturing him, and who murdered an innocent man in the process. Now, granted, she certainly didn't order them to kill that guy. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but still, Oliver's mom is officially an accessory to murder. And yeah, this makes her seem like a very interesting character. Early on, she just seemed like, the grieving mom, sort of the weird tension between her having married in the time since remarried since the time of Oliver's dad's death to the guy from the Resident Evil movies. But, here, it really brings it home. It sort of sets up a clash between Ollie, ideologically and emotionally, between his mother and his father. And that makes for some, to me, in my mind, some really great storytelling. Oh yeah, one other thing I almost forgot about. Some people have also been complaining about the fact that Green Arrow doesn't have a sister in the comics. Well, so what? This isn't the comics. What's wrong with giving him a sister in this version? I mean, I understand people wanting stories to be faithful to the comics. But if a change is not going to... If it's not a negative change, then why complain about it? Then you're just you're complaining, really, to me, just for the sake of complaining. Yes, they're doing something different, but different is not automatically bad. I mean, would Ollie have been a radically different person if he had had a sister? Well, maybe. But again, here we get to see, and he even makes it quite clear, someone else touched by the fallout of Ollie's apparent death. And someone who is also certainly impacted very heavily by the death of Oliver's father. So again, I don't really have a problem with this. This isn't the comics. It isn't meant to be the comics. And I just don't really see this as being some sort of it's ruined deal. It's not a deal breaker. It's not like saying that Bruce Wayne had an older brother or something like that. If you did that, then the Batman mythology would be radically different. Having Green Arrow have a sister doesn't really change the Green Arrow mythology significantly. So, with that all said, overall, I really enjoy this. I certainly, definitely enjoy seeing Paul Blackthorne again. He's really the only person in the cast who I'm really all familiar with terribly. And he is, of course, probably best known to a lot of audiences, at least in the geeky crowd, as Harry Dresden on the short-lived but reasonably faithful in spirit to the source material Dresden Files TV series that was on the Sci-Fi Channel a couple of years back. And honestly, it's certainly always nice to see another British actor who can do a good American accent. Please take note of this, guys who make Doctor Who. I still haven't forgiven you for the Daleks for Daleks in New York. Oh my God! Was that payback for Dick Van Dyke's Cockney accent and Mary Poppins? God Almighty! But anyway, folks, at the end of the day, I like this episode. I like this show, and I'm really interested to see the next one. It feels like this is going to be something that, yes, just by the nature of being a live-action series, is going to have to make some fairly notable changes. But it also feels to me like something that's going to be very true to the spirit of the comics. And yes, it's going to be perhaps a more gritty take on Green Arrow than what we're accustomed to, but what's wrong with that? As I said, there have been hundreds and hundreds of stories where Green Arrow doesn't kill people, where he does the things that we traditionally associate with Green Arrow. So what's wrong with there being one story where he's not above taking lives, and where he's a little bit different? You know what? I'm just going to leave it at that. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to say one more thing about this. I know, and this is me addressing another fan complaint. Now, one of the other complaints I said is, well, why didn't you just take Justin Hartley from Smallville and give him his own TV series? Well, first of all, that character and that version of Oliver Queen had several years of history and story under his belt by the time Smallville ended. If you want to start a new TV series, going with a spin-off character is always a risky bet, especially one that has a fairly decent number of years under their belt. You don't want to drop a huge amount of information on a new viewer in the first episode. You don't want to make them feel like they need to go back and watch 4 or 5 seasons of Smallville in order to understand this character. Also, in Smallville, the character of Oliver Queen had already gone through huge portions of the hero's journey to go from, sort of jerk vigilante to essentially the founder and leader of the Justice League. The story of his journey to becoming Green Arrow, a very similar to the comics version of Green Arrow, had already been done. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why this version of the character is so different than what we traditionally see, because we've just got a very faithful to the comics take on Green Arrow in Justin Hartley. So with that said, I can understand why they would want to go even further away from the comics in that regard, because otherwise they're just treading over the ground that Smallville has gone over so recently in the past few years. So with that said, I will well and truly wrap this review up here. And I will do so by saying that I think this is a good show. I have the feeling that this is the potential to be a truly enjoyable live action superhero show that could go on for quite a few years. And it's been a really long time since we had that. Now, granted, it wasn't that long ago that Smallville wrapped up, but Smallville had quite a stretch of crappy years there that the last few seasons where it got good again, even to my mind, didn't quite make up for it. And also, Smallville was a little bit more heavy on the cheesy side of things. So I'm perfectly okay with getting a show that's a little bit more on the gritty side of things. So with that, folks said, I'm gonna say as I'm gonna. Ugh, I cannot talk, so it's definitely time to end this video. So, with that said, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.